Apparently slurping coffee adds some air in there, which makes it taste better. Seems like it's really just obnoxious. The poverty line in the US right now is $26,000 per year for a family of 4. And today I wanted to talk about why it's more expensive to be poor than it is to be rich. Like the fees and the things that poor people deal with that the rich and middle class don't really have to, and why it's harder to be poor and harder to get out of that cycle. One reason for poverty is that the minimum wage has not kept up with the cost of living. So if you're working at that job, you're gonna have to work more hours than you would before just to be at that same level as somebody else. So you're kind of starting from behind. More and more Americans are struggling and living paycheck to paycheck, especially with everything that's going on right now. So whether you're making $25,000 or $40,000 or $60,000, you can still be extremely stressed and have to deal with a lot of these things. And naturally, tens of millions of Americans are dealing with all these things, and it's making the rich richer. The lack of money leads to higher interest. So when the rich borrow money and you have a good credit score and you have a lot of money in the bank, people almost shove money in your face and ask you to invest it. They ask you to take this money.
Shut up and take my money.
You'll get better rates on everything. Money will just be cheaper for you. But when you're poor and you have bad credit, money's gonna be more expensive. Everything you buy on credit is gonna be a higher percentage, because the lower your credit score is, the more interest you're gonna pay. So whether that's buying a house or a car or anything else, you're gonna have to pay a higher rate than the rich. When you don't have enough money to pay for things, something that has become popular is rent to own. And this can really add up and really be expensive. So maybe your refrigerator breaks and you don't have the $500 or $1,000 or $1,500 to buy a new refrigerator. Well, you might have $30 a week that you could pay for that, but instead of spending $1,000 on a refrigerator, when you're doing the $30 a week, it might end up costing $1,500 or more. But a lot of people don't see it that way, or they have no choice. So they end up renting their furniture, renting their TV, renting their appliances, and all those things. While you think you can manage that monthly payment, it's actually spending a lot more in the long run. Whereas rich people are able to pay cash for things, get them on sale. I'm not calling myself rich because I'm not, but when I buy an appliance, I'm able to pay cash for one, and I'm able to get one that has a ding in it. So maybe instead of a $1,500 one, I get it on sale for 50% off for $700. And I'm able to do that because I'm paying cash for it. If I didn't have the cash, I would have to finance it. And it would cost me a lot more because I wouldn't be able to get those same type of appliances. So when you have less money, you have a lot less options, and it's a lot easier to get taken advantage of. Nearly 10 million Americans don't have bank accounts, and around 25 million Americans have trouble maintaining their minimum balance. On average, these families spend around $3,000 a year on bank fees, overdraft fees, high interest. Whereas somebody who always has enough money in the bank to cover their needs is never gonna have to pay a lot of those fees. Another thing is, if you don't have a bank account, you have to go to a check cashing service. A lot of times you're gonna pay a percentage. So right off the bat, you're losing a percentage of your paycheck just to receive it. And that's the cost of not having a bank account. Another thing has been payday lenders. This has become really popular recently, and there's even apps now that offer you an advance on your paycheck. And if you can't wait for your paycheck because maybe you went to the ER or you had an emergency, you got a flat tire and you need money now, you can get that money early. You can get an advance on your paycheck, but oftentimes it comes at an exorbitant cost. It can cost you up to 400% on that money. So people are just making an insane amount off of you. For instance, the average return in the stock market has been, around 10%, and they're making 400% by, kind of taking advantage of people who really need it. 400% just blows my mind. It's just to get it a few days earlier because of emergency. Sometimes you just need it for, for food or just to get by. You end up with other fees as well. Like maybe if you can't pay your electric bill and they shut it off, you have a reconnection fee. These fees add up to thousands of dollars a year. And when you are living paycheck to paycheck, these fees can seem normal. It's just the cost of survival when you're just that close to the edge. Things tend to snowball. When you have no money, unlike somebody who does, if they have a flat tire or get in a car accident or miss a few days of work, all those things are acceptable. They can survive. They can, might eat up into their security fund a little bit, but they can get by if they miss a few days of work. When you're in poverty though, and maybe your kid's sick and you have to stay home, or you have car issues and you're not able to get to work, that can really snowball really quickly, where you miss one day and then you're behind on a payment, you start paying interest on that payment, and then something else happens, and all these things can just really add up really quickly from a very small initial problem. So you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. If you're surrounded by people who smoke and drink and work minimum wage jobs, there's a very, very high percentage chance that you will end up smoking and drinking and working a minimum wage job. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but it's also a cycle that makes it very hard to get out of when everybody you know is living in the slums, everybody you know is living a certain lifestyle. It's very hard to get out of that. Higher percentages. 1 out of 4 Americans is paying over 50% of their income for their housing. And if you own a car in America, the average cost is around $8,000 because you have insurance, you have tires, you have oil changes, gas, you have, the car itself, depreciation, all these things. So owning a car is very expensive. And if you're making minimum wage and you're making, 15, 20 grand a year, you could be losing half of your income just for the transportation to be able to get to work. So right off the bat, 6 months out of the year, you're working in order to be able to go to work. If you can't afford a security deposit and you can't afford the first month's rent because maybe you've had an eviction in your past, or maybe you're just living really close to the edge and you just don't have that money, you can end up paying more to live by the week. For instance, in my market, you can rent a 1-bedroom entire apartment for around $1,000 a month, and maybe even a 2-bedroom for around $1,200 a month. However, if you're paying by the week, which a lot of people in poverty end up having to do, it can cost you $200 per week to live in a 1-bedroom of a 3-bedroom apartment, like just to rent a room. It can end up costing you from 30 to 50% more to rent by the week. Lost opportunity. When you can't afford to take a pay cut to move to a different job, or you can't afford to even change your hours or move to a different location, or miss out on a few weeks of work so that you can get this new job, it really limits your options, and you lose that opportunity cost of not being able to take the chance and maybe fly out for an interview at a different place across the country, or even to get to a few different interviews. Or maybe if you don't have a car and you're relying on public transportation, it really limits your options as to where you are able to get a job. Or maybe you just don't have enough money to pay for the education that is required to get a higher paying job. Education is often seen as the answer, and I firmly don't believe that it is, even though for some people it's definitely necessary. I don't think for everybody it is. So while a rich person might be able to have their parents pay for their schooling, or at least some of it, or they'll have free housing afterwards, or they might have some advantages when it comes to school, even though still a lot of the time people end up with $50,000 to $100,000 worth of student loan debt. When you're coming from poverty, there's a much higher chance that you're going to incur student loan debt because you're barely getting by as it is. You're not going to be able to afford to spend a lot of extra money on those monthly payments. So I know a lot of people who have gone to school and they end up with $50,000 to $100,000 worth of student loan debt, and they're still paying that off when they're 40 and 50, which is just a huge amount of stress on you for a number of years. And minimum, it can probably take you 5 to 10 years to pay off that student loan debt. Whereas if you went a different option and you never got into that debt, you don't have to worry about paying it off, which is kind of the route that I went. Why I didn't go to school, because I didn't know what I would want to go for. Most people don't use the degree in the field that they're going in, and the average student loan debt is around $35,000. So I think that college is actually pretty much just a scam to get people strapped into working these horrible jobs just to get by, because now they have a higher monthly payment that they have to make because they have all the student loan debt, and it can really just strap people down for such a long time when it's definitely not necessary anymore. But when you don't have money to start with and you're barely getting by, and then you add student loan debt on top of that, it can really cripple people. A lot of people just think if you work harder, you can just get out of poverty, but there are really traps that people fall into. And if you don't have the financial education, because they don't teach you anything really useful in school about this, then you can end up being caught in that cycle for a really long time. That was extremely depressing, but if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Usually I talk about financial independence and how you can start saving money and investing money, and also some minimalism tips. So if you're interested in that, stick around, come back next week. We got some cool stuff in the works. Oh, that's cold. Ugh.